For the 20 years that Yaakov Avinu worked for Lavan, he was effectively in Golus. What kept him focused? What kept him afloat? We're told 15 chapters of Tehillim, the Shir HaMailos, which means that their content and the number 15 both give us insights into how he survived and how we survive Golus. The Pasha tells us that Yaakov Avinu rested in that place. The Medrash gives us two opinions about what the Torah wants us to know about that place where Yaakov Avinu rested. Kan shochav, here he lay down. But for 14 years before this, when Yaakov Avinu was in the yeshivas of Shem and Aver, he did not lie down once. And then there's the second opinion which we will focus on, which is Kan shochav, here Yaakov Avinu lay down. But for 20 years working in his father-in-law's house, he never got to lie down and sleep properly. The pasuk later will tell us, he tells Lavan, sleep was driven from my eyes. Now let's look at that medrash. Is a mamshach medrash. Then the medrash says, so what did Yaakov Avinu say while he was working for Lavan? Two opinions. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Omar Tezvav She'amaylis She'B'Sefer Tehillim. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says that he said the 15 chapters of She'amaylis in Tehillim. My ta'amei, how do we know that? Because look at the pasuk, it says She'amaylis LeDavid Lo LeHashem Shahar Yolanu Yomano Yisrael. Tehillim Kuf Chav Dalet tells us that Yaakov Avinu, that David HaMelech says, were it not for Hashem who helped us, says Yisrael. Which Yisrael? Yisrael Sava Yaakov Avinu, the original Yisrael, Yaakov Avinu. Shmuel bar Nachman Amar Kol Sefer Tehillim Ha'Yomer, whereas Shmuel bar Nachman says he actually said the entire Tehillim. Ma'atam, how do we know that? Because the pasuk says, "V'ata Kadosh Yoshev Tehillos Yisrael." You, the Eibishter, who are holy, you sit and listen to the praises of Yisrael. Which Yisrael? Yisrael Sava. So what's the question? What was Yaakov Avinu saying at this time? The Pshat in the Shaila Meh Ha'Yomer. We're not asking the question, what occupied Yaakov's time while he was at Lavan, because we know what his time is occupied with. Torah tells us clearly that he invested all of his energy in looking after Yaakov Avinu, Lavan's flocks. Bees by Yom Gomer Balayla, to the extent that he was busy with a sheep by day and by night, to the point that he drove sleep from his eyes. So what is the question? Not the shaila is, was hat Yaakov gesagt mispalel given? Gelernt. What was Yaakov while he was busy? What was he davening? What was he learning? Today to kennen iber kommen die Schwierigkeiten in Chonon und beweis Lavan, which allowed him to overcome the challenges and difficulties of being in a horrid place like Choron, working for Lavan. So Zayinig beweis Lavan is doch Yaakov in a maimad do matzav shel Golus, being in Lavan's home. Yaakov Avinu was in Golus. Is weggegangen in Beis Yitzchak Aviv to sein beweis Lavan. He had to abandon his own father Yitzchak's house, which was a holy place, to be in Lavan's environment. And then hat sich dort vernommen mit Zayn Lavan, Lavan's Zayn. What did he spend his time with? Sheep, and not just any sheep, the sheep that belonged to a crooked man called Lavan. In fact, to be in Lavan's environment automatically impacted Yaakov Avinu, that he kind of was demoted spiritually. Where do we see that? Rashi sagt, as Yaakov hat gesagt, im Ramos hu ba, gam ani achiv Ramos. That Yaakov Avinu said, he knew what kind of a character Lavan was. He said, if Lavan is going to come with me, towards me with deceit, I will be his partner, I'll be his peer, his brother in deceit. Das heißt, as bei ihm es gewinnt, kvayochad in Haramos, bedugmas Haramos de Lavan. That Yaakov Ishtam, Yaakov, the sincere individual who spent his entire life studying Torah, had to lower himself, so to speak, into Lavan's world to counteract his deceit. So he's in a terrible state of Golus. Therefore we have a big question. Wie azoi is durchgegangen und beigestanden der Inyan HaGolus? How did Yaakov push through the Golus? How did he withstand the Golus? Sich ist doch das gewinnt durch Kel Yaakov. Obviously, it would have been through his major skill, which is the skill of his voice, which neutralizes the hands of his enemies. The Medrash wants to know which particular area of focus was he using. So what was he saying? And for the Medrash, so the Medrash says the two opinions. As das seinen gewähnt, Tezvav, She'amalish B'Sefer Tehillim, according to Rabbi Shimon Levi, 15 Prakim of Tehillim, oder Kol Sefer Tehillim, according to Rabbi Shimon bar Nachman, the entire Tehillim. Das hat ihm gegeben dem Keach, as soll können durchmachen dem Inyan HaGolus, that empowered Yaakov to get through the Golus. If that's the case, we need to understand. The opinion that says he read the entire Tehillim is verstandig. Die Sheichos von der Amira zu Yaakov in der Zeit Shomet Vayeitzei Shel. We get it, we understand it. Saying the entire Tehillim is going to empower him during the time that he's dealing with Lavan. And we understand why Tehillim, of all things, he is so busy that he can't really delve into the depth of Torah, certainly not like it was in Yeshiva. Al kol panim nit wie b'shas as given Tomer b'Vayeitzei. So in place of in-depth learning, he shared praises of the Eibishter, which the Medrash tells us is something that a person is rewarded for, as if they had learned the intricacies of those laws of tzaras and those laws of how impurity is spread through canopies and covers and tents, etc. So that would make sense. Tehillim makes sense. But Rabbi Shimon Levi's opinion doesn't seem to make sense. Was ist aber die spezielle Sheichus von die Tez Vav Shir HaMaylish der B'Sefer Tehillim zu sein Matzot Bebeis Lavan? What would be special and unique about the 15 chapters of Shir HaMaylish that would have been the solution to Yaakov's withstanding the Golus in Lavan's house? So we'll start with a quotation from the Chidah. Very interesting, the significance of the number 15. Wenn man das verstehen möchte, was der Chidah bringt, as the Tez Vav Shir HaMaylos am David Olav HaShalom, the Chidah says that the 15 Shir HaMaylos were composed by David HaMelech keneged Tez Vav Shanim shechoyu ha'ovis biyachad, to represent the 15 years of overlap in the lives of all three of us. And here's the simple math behind it. Avram Avinu had gelebt 100 shana v'shivim shana v'chamesh shanim. Avram Avinu lived to 175. Yitzchak is born when Avram is given ben 100 shana. Yitzchak is born when Avram is 100. Und Yaakov is born when Yitzchak is given ben 60 shana. Yaakov is born when Yitzchak is 60. Okay, so that means at that age, Avram is 160. So if Avram lives now till 175, that means that Yaakov lives at the same time as his father and grandfather for 15 years. Kommt aus, als seine given tes was shalim shechoyu ha'avos biyachad. Va bizekem in zogen. So if the Chidah is telling us that the 15 Shir HaMaylos represent Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov living in the same period, then we can explain, as Yaakov has gesagt, die Tez Vav Shir HaMaylos shebesefer Tehillim, that's what Yaakov chose to say as his davening while working for Lavan. Why? Because in addition to the Tehillos, the praises given to the Eibishter, which is so valuable, he also wants to invoke the merits of his forefathers, Yitzchak and Avram. Das heißt, as Neisef auf seine eigene Zachis v'koiches. Besides the fact that Yaakov Avinu obviously has his own talents, abilities, and strengths, he also wants to draw on the unique strengths and talents of Avram and Yitzchak, which would help him to overcome the obstacles and challenges in Lavan's house. And you actually see Yaakov Avinu say this himself, where he says, when he addresses Lavan, he says clearly, were it not for the Eibishter, my God, and God of my grandfather Avram, and the God that my father feared, if not for the support of not just my God, but the Eibishter as he is the God of Avram and Yitzchak, I wouldn't have gotten through this. So the time for was hat davon kommen zum Schluss von alle Oves, you may wonder, why is it that Yaakov Avinu needs the backing of Avram and Yitzchak to get through this? To overcome the challenges of being in Lavan's environment. Wenn verstehen von der Eitze, was bringt sich von der wie zum Menachzech seine Vayeitzei bechlal, will understand the answer to this based on a strategy that Tzemach Tzedek teaches to overcome the Yetzer Hara, was wir hat abgelernt von Melchama Kipshuta, welches vorgekommen in die Zeiten von Alten Rebben, which the Tzemach Tzedek actually derived from a war that happened in the time of the Alter Rebbe. The Seder von Ma'arachis HaMelchama bechlal is, generally speaking, the Tzemach Tzedek describes the typical strategy of wars was as they would split the army into 3 platoons. One middle thrust and then 2 flanks. And the enemy would do the same, and the 2 opponents would come at each other with the same formation of soldiers. Das Loch in der Melchama was given in jener Zeit, so the Tzemach Tzedek describes a war that happened at the time of the Alter Rebbe, and what created the success, the victory of the one side against the other. The one side concentrated all 3 of their forces and against one segment of the opposing forces, which allowed them an absolute and guaranteed success. Now, the point of the Tzemach Tzedek was not so much to focus on the story, but rather the lesson. The Tzemach Tzedek says there's a lesson for this in our ruchnistic avodah mechemes hayetzer, the battle against our Yetzer Hara. To overcome the Yetzer Hara, we have to concentrate all three faculties of kedusha, which is ahava, v'yira, v'rachamim, love of Hashem, awe of Hashem, and compassion. And zone that in against one element of klipa, one element of the Yetzer Hara. In that way, we'll definitely bring the Yetzer Hara down and be victorious. With that in mind, we can understand what the Yaakov Avinu wanted to do in Lavan's house. That's why he needed the 15 prakim of Shera Mailes, which represent the 15 years of overlap of the three Avos. So you can concentrate all of their energies, all of their powers, all of their collective value against the threat of Lavan. So these three attributes of Kedusha that the Tzemach Tzedek identified are represented by the three of us. Ava, Onira, Verachamim. Avram Avinu is love, Yitzchak Avinu is pachad, is fear of Hashem, and Yaakov Avinu is tiferes, is rachamim. When you have all three working in collaboration, which represents pooling the resources of all three channels of Kedusha, that empowers us to overcome and to see our way clear through all of the challenges of Golus. We're now going to drill this down deeper and look at why it is that the number that is associated with channeling these three energies against one target of impurity is dafka the number 15, because Chassidus tells us why it is significant for us to know that there are 15 Shera Mailis and 15 years where all three of us lived together. What's the significance of 15? Yud and Hey. The first two letters of Hashem's name, the Yud and the Hey, make up the value of 15. Was der Chelek zwischen Yud K and Vav K is the distinction between the first two letters of Hashem's name, Yud and Hey, versus the last two letters of Hashem's name, Vav and Hey, is as the Oisis Vav Zainin Bechinas Midas and Malchus. The letter Vav, which has the numerical value of 6, that represents the 6 Midas, Chesed Gvur Tiferet Netzach Hod Yesod. And the final Hey, that represents the level of Malchus. Whereas on the Oisis Yud K, Zainin Bechinas Moichin, whereas the first two letters of Hashem's name represent the intellectual abilities, because Yud is the representation of Chochmah, and Hey is the icon of Bina. And that teaches us the significance of all three of us living together for a period of 15 years. Because the mechanism by which we can concentrate all three channels of Ava, Yira, Rachamim, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and zone them in all against a particular challenge of Golus, Chayu ha'avos b'yachad, which is represented by the thought of all three of us living simultaneously. The only way that can happen is that the midas have to be guided by and illuminated by the insight and the light of Moichin. In simple English, emotions don't tend to collaborate. You have to have the maturity and the objectivity of Seichel to be able to bring midas into collaboration. Because intellect is devised in a way which is beyond the natural distinction between the various midas. That's why any time that something is higher and greater than a particular system, it can override the barriers of the system and allow things to come into harmony. So because Seichel is beyond the restrictions of Midos, where Chesed is one direction, and Gvura is another direction, or Ahava is one direction, and Yira is another direction, because the intellect is beyond all of those boundaries, it can bring them into harmony to work together. Thing is, that doesn't give us a full explanation yet of what Yaakov Avinu was doing. He wasn't just invoking the number 15. It's not a good enough explanation, because the Tezvav Shira Mailis Sefer Tehillim, he was specifically engaged in Shira Mailis, for an Ongrufen B'Shem Shir, which are all collectively called songs. And song is obviously linked to joy. How could Yaakov Avinu have davened and engaged with the Eibishter in a mode of joy and song while he's in a place of darkness and Golus? Even of course, these are Tehillim that speak about how the Eibishter helps us through difficult times. That the Eibishter empowers us to be able to overcome the strictures of the Golus that we're in. True. But how is it possible for a person to be in a tangible, noticeable, revealed simcha? Because only if you're in a real state of joy does it make sense to sing. Like the Gemara tells us that you don't really have shira unless you have wine, because wine is mesameach, it brings out joy. Yaakov Avinu is in Choron, one of the worst places on earth, place that focuses the Eibishter's anger. And specifically in Choron is in Lavan's house. How does he have a state of simcha? How does he sing shira? Is the beer in them? The explanation is because Yaakov understands the value of the experience. The only reason Yaakov went down into this messy environment of Lavan's house was to produce afterwards a tremendous rebound and a tremendous aliyah. Like the pasuk says, that he should have incredible success and burst through all the barriers of anything that might have limited his success previously. Because Yaakov could see clearly what the purpose was of having to go into Lavan's house. He could see the value and the aliyah that would emerge afterwards. So therefore, already now in the quagmire of Lavan's house, he's already singing, because he sees the value and he sees the direction and he sees the benefit and he sees the growth that will come as a result. Now, to understand that better, you can always really get where something is going by where it begins. So if you want to understand where the Shir HaMailos are going, 15 Shir HaMailos, start with the first one. It will give us insight. And in the first one itself, we also know that you typically look at the concluding line or concluding lesson of a particular concept in Torah, and that summarizes what it's all about. So the last line of the first of the Shir HaMailos will give us a proper insight into why the Shir HaMailos were the tool that Yaakov used, and how Yaakov had the clarity of purpose. You always emphasize the value and meaning of something right at the beginning. So this rebound and this growth and aliyah that's going to emerge from Yaakov having spent time in Lavan's house in Golus is will be highlighted in the first Kuf Chaf, the first of the 15 Shir HaMailos. The Siyam v'Chesem from the Meshon Shir HaMailos, the last line of that capital, where the signature of an entire paragraph is the last line, is Ani Shalom, is David HaMelech saying, I am all about peace. And they speak the language of war. Which means Yaakov Avinu obviously wants Shalom. He wants peace, ultimate harmony between good and bad, between dark and light, between spiritual and physical. But as Rashi says, in spite of his good intentions, though others, the opponents, want to come and they want to fight. And here we're talking about a spiritual battle, which means those who are pushing back and are looking for war, they're looking to obstruct holiness and godliness. Which represents in the broader sense the obstacles, challenges and tests that we have when we're trying to serve Hashem and they obstruct us from serving Hashem. But Yaakov Avinu addresses that, and he says a shir, a song, a joyous song of Mailos, representing the aliyah that will follow, against those who are looking for war. Yaakov Avinu is framing for us the tremendous value that will emerge from having this battle that he doesn't want to have. Rabbi was meaning this. We, as Jewish people, can never elect to take a challenge to our spirituality. But to the contrary, at Daf Bet, and we daven every single morning, that the Eibishter should not bring us to a place of being challenged. Therefore, our positioning statement is, we want peace. We want to serve the Eibishter in a way that is free of controversy and of conflict and of difficulty. We don't want to have to fight. We don't want to have challenges. But the Eibishter, from his perspective, has designed the world in such a way that there's tremendous value when you have to fight for something and when you've had trials and tribulations to achieve something. As vision the Hema, the Eibishter makes a system where Hema, they, plural, come to fight with me. Why plural? Because it's referring to the realities of this world, which is called a place of multiplicity. There's no single focus. There's no awareness of godliness. The Eibishter sends those elements into our lives to obstruct us, to create resistance. And our response to that is Shir HaMailas. Because not only will these challenges not prevent us from doing what Hashem wants, not only will they not weaken our resolve to do what Hashem wants, nor aderabba, to the contrary, they will empower us. They will bring out resources within ourselves that are stronger and greater than anything we imagined we had. And therefore the person, in our case Yaakov Avinu, but the lesson is for all of us, sees the nisayon, sees the challenge coming, and is already in a state of simcha, knowing that the challenge is a catalyst for growth and for exponential growth. And that's an eternal lesson like anything else in Torah. It's the Fumuvan, which means, as Kol Hanalis Hara calls Managolus, the entire story of Yaakov Avinu and his attitude to being with Lavan and his success over Lavan is a lesson for us in Golus. And is particularly relevant in our times, on the edge, on the cusp of Geula, when things are particularly tough. When you pay attention and just meditate a little bit, contemplate the difficulties, the extreme difficulties that we have in this generation. Such overpowering difficulties that prompt us to echo David HaMelech's words in Tehillim, where will the salvation come from? A person could become completely despondent, God forbid. Take a lesson from Yaakov Avinu. Is the the entire concept of the Jewish nation being degraded into a state of Golus, which is really similar to Yaakov having to leave the spiritual cocoon of his father's house to go into Haran, which is the most antithetical spiritual environment, is bishvil ho'aliyah. It is all only to facilitate a far greater growth. So we'll be able to achieve the greatness of light that emerges from darkness, and the greatness of wisdom that emerges from foolishness. So therefore, borrowing words again from the Shir HaMailas, we should raise our eyes. We have to look differently at the world. We have to raise our perspective. And focus on the purpose of Golus rather than the experience of Golus. The purpose of Golus is the incredible exponential elevation that we'll experience when Mashiach comes. When we have that focus and attitude, not only are we not overwhelmed by the challenges and experiences of Golus, we could actually face the Golus with joy, with simcha, shir hamaylos, the joy of knowing that this is the rebound, this is the trampoline that is going to elevate us. Chas v'sholom to sagen, dass man darf sein zufrieden von der Maimed und Matze von Golus. Now let's be clear that that doesn't mean we should be satisfied, certainly not happy, with the circumstances of Golus. Und trachten als das am Maimed Matim Frieden, chas v'sholom. And we should never entertain the possibility that, God forbid, this is an appropriate state for the Jewish nation. Golus la'inem von choshech und sichlus v'cholom. We need to know clearly, Golus is darkness, Golus is foolishness. Und a'id beGolus sagt Torah es klar und deutlich, and the Torah is very clear that a Jewish person in Golus, as there is a ben shegolom el shulchan David HaMelech, is a child exiled from his father, the king's table. It's not where we belong. We have to have that clarity. On oib der ben filtandish and zogtandish, and if God forbid the child feels comfortable away from the father's table and says things that it's okay to be away, it's verstandig die spezielle Finsternis und Niedrigkeit von sein Golus. You can understand what kind of a darkness and lowly reality such a person is living in, to think that Golus is comfortable. Now, man darf sich reintrachten in der Kavona Shabbos. So where's our simcha from? Not complacency, not acceptance, but focus. Knowing that there will be an advantage to light from this darkness. And there will be an advantage to wisdom out of this foolishness. And then we'll be able to realize when we say Esoyanai, that we raise our hands in supplication to Hashem, asking, may I, and from where will our answer, salvation, come? In that line itself, we recognize the answer. In the Shaila Gufa, Leighton Pirush HaPnimi, based on the explanation of Chassidus, as the Ezer Vatnim Shechafun Bechinas Ayin, that may Ayin Vayeitzei, my Ezer, my support, my help will come from where? From Ayin. Men ken die beginnen niet bij grefen, a level that is so profound that we can't begin to comprehend it. It's beyond comprehension, not only human comprehension, but all comprehension. It's beyond names. Ayin, it's the unknown. On the Ezer wat nimshach eichen say the Shtalshlus, Leibishter will bring such an elevated level, which is completely beyond the entire structure and system of existence. And he'll bring that energy into the structure and system of existence. On Begilai, in a way that is revealed on his pale dart, that we'll see that the Eibishter who made heaven and earth is the one who gives us what we need and helps us. To the extent that will translate into the actual physical manifestation of the Eibishter's help, the Eibishter's Ezer, the Eibishter's Geula. And Mitzvah Hashem, it should happen, take umiyad mamish.